stay on. That's okay. If you do want to move over, otherwise.
Yes, that's where I get it.
What, on the screen?
That link on Skype the next it's fine. I mean, it's I think I had a hard copy at the office here. Just those bits. It's just like, am I making it a little too complex in what I want to do in some of those gaps, or am I just the icons and things like that?
If you'd like to take your seat, we'll be starting in about 1 minute. Yeah, if you want to say right. Yeah. Oh yes.
Is that okay, Thomas?
Yeah, sure.
Okay then, I think it's time we started the afternoon session, which is a continuation of this morning's topic with two more papers on games-based learning. But can I first just, at David's request, make sure you all know about the reception this evening at 6 o'clock at the National Video Game Arcade. Hope to see as many of you as possible there. So, the first of our two papers on games-based learning, before we move on to a different topic this afternoon, is from Greg Sutton, and is using Unity to create teaching tools for teaching academically and clinically within occupational therapy. Over to you.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me. My name is Greg Sutton. I'm from the University of Derby. I'm from the Learning Enhancement Department, and we developed the interaction I'm about to show you. If any of this looks familiar to you and you were here last year, that's because Kate Frumpton, who's doing the clinical research, was presenting her research findings. Today I'm going to be mainly talking about the educational aspects of the interaction and how we developed it over time, and the comparison we've done between the current Unity interaction and the previous Second Life and OpenSim interaction. So I'm not going to go into this too much. We use Unity basically because of the ability to output to multiple platforms. I'm sure a lot of you know about that already. So a bit of the history of the interaction. We started building this in about 2009. Initially we were in Second Life. We had a few problems with crowding because we're in a classroom situation. You've got 20 students all trying to access it at the same time. So we either had the choice of building 20 flats or doing something else, and we tried to group them together. So there's like several people around the PC, and we built 2 flats because of limitations of space in Second Life. And that worked okay, but it was still quite crowded, quite a lot of crowding. There were people in Second Life not being able to see what they're supposed to see because there's other avatars in the way. So we moved that to OpenSim. We did 2 years in Second Life, then went to OpenSim. We added 4 flats in OpenSim, gives us a bit more space. And also, at that time, Second Life introduced the web browser, so you could actually view web pages within Second Life. And we moved all the questions for the interactions onto the internet, so we can then link it to a database and store all the student responses. We could also store the questions and answers on the database, so we could give feedback at the end of the exercise. The research for this, to prove that, the concept of this, was done by Pauline Rowe and Karen Newbury. And that's the quote there. Initially, this exercise was done on paper. Their research was comparing the paper-based exercise to the Second Life exercise, and they found that the students were getting a lot more out of the Second Life exercise. This is where the clinical research started to come in. They were initially trying to use OpenSim in a hospital situation on laptop, and that doesn't work very well without an internet connection. And also the Second Life interface isn't very well designed for being used with patients, so it was quite cumbersome to use that. So we've moved to Unity. Again, this is so that people can use it on a mobile device, which is a lot more convenient for carrying around in a hospital. So we've got some of the comparisons here between Unity and Second Life. Mainly the cost. The cost of running a Second Life island is now about $1,700 a year, and there's a $700 setup charge per island. So that's quite a lot for a project that we're only actually using with students for sort of 1 session a year, or maybe 2 sessions a year. So move it all into Unity or even OpenSim, where we can just run it on a local server, makes it a lot cheaper. Again, there were reliability issues with Second Life. All our sessions happened to be on the same time that Second Life do their maintenance. So we had, on a number of occasions, had to get all the students to log in again because the island went offline during the exercise. I'm hoping you're all familiar with Second Life. It's a virtual world platform where people can communicate with each other. And that was another problem. The communication side of Second Life was distracting to students. For this exercise, they don't need to be able to communicate with each other. And seeing the other avatars around, that's also distracting, and that actually gets in the way of the exercise. So there is a bit of a downside to Unity. The development costs, they are a bit higher. It takes on average about 2 or 3 times more time to build the equivalent Unity interaction as it would a Second Life interaction. And you do need more skills to do so. You need somebody with high skills to build the Unity interactions. But once you've done that, and you're clear of the maintenance costs of the Second Life island, so in the long term it's going to work out to be cheaper. And there are also more development freedoms in Unity. You can design your own interface, set up however you want to do it. And for the clinical interactions, we've developed a number of different interfaces. And also the distribution, which I've also already mentioned. So what is the occupational therapy interaction? Occupational therapists have to go into patients' homes. We're mainly talking about stroke patients, and we're also talking about people with mental issues. They go into the home to see if, after a stroke, the home is suitable for them to return to. Quite a lot of the time, you talk to a patient in hospital, they don't realise the issues they're going to have when they go home. So until you sort of take a patient home and see them in that environment, you don't really understand how the patient's going to be able to look after themselves when they go home. So it's obviously not feasible to take 60 students around a patient's home, and it's also too expensive to sort of set up a mock location where students can go in. So that's why we've gone for the interaction rather than an actual visit. What the students do in the interaction is they go into the home, they look around. If they see an object they think is going to be an issue for the patient, they click on it. It then comes up with a number of options. You can see here, so motor skills, cognitive, and various. They click on the ones they think are relevant, and they also type in a reason for their choices, sort of clinical reason why they've chosen those choices. At the end of the exercise, they can go in again and can click on the same items or different items and then get feedback or get sample answers. Obviously, some of the items in the house are safe and some are an issue. So looking at the comparison between Unity and Second Life, first we're looking at ease of use. We surveyed the students after they'd used Second Life and Unity to find out which they found easy to learn how to use. The majority of the students found Unity easier to use. And again, we also asked them which one they found easier to use. We found Unity easier to use. In general, the training for Unity is about half the training time that you need to train in Second Life or OpenSim, mainly because we've cut out all the distractions and they just need to learn the tasks they need to do to actually do the exercise. So this is more about the time. Looking at Second Life, so we asked them how quickly they became capable of doing the exercise in Second Life and Unity. And we see from here, the same amount of people find it slow in both Second Life and Unity. But if you look at the results for how many people found they could use Unity immediately, that goes up from in Second Life, it's about 17%. To Unity, 32% of the people thought they could use it immediately. When we did the tests, we see the different groups. Group 1 used Unity first, Group 2 used Second Life first. So it gives a good comparison. So the reasons aren't because of the order they did the exercises in, it's because of the actual exercise themselves. Some people experience negative physiological side effects when playing games. We expected Unity, being a first-person game in this instance, to be worse than Second Life, being a third-person. What we actually found was the opposite. And in the direct comparison we did between Second Life and Unity with the students using both, only 7% found they had problems in Unity compared to 14% in Second Life. As you see on there, Group 4 and Group 5, that's a bit higher. These students in Group 5, they only use Unity. This was from the second year of the study, and we found that their negative responses was a lot higher. We're looking into reasons what could cause that. Part of it could be that they were in the exercise for twice as long. They were doing 4 different exercises where the people who before only did 2. Part of it could be because of the lighting conditions, or because in Unity they were all working as individuals, whereas in Second Life they worked in groups of 2 or 3. So not everybody who used it when we did the direct comparison was actually sat at a computer controlling an avatar, which is the main cause of the negative effects. Again, here we see some of the reasons why Second Life was more negative. The constant movement of the camera you get when you have an avatar and there's a camera behind the avatar's head. Every time the avatar turns around, so there's a wall behind them, the camera moves closer to the head to get past the wall, and it's that constant moving in and out of the camera which seems to be the biggest trigger for people feeling nausea or dizziness. So here's the sort of summary of the direct comparison. In the shared virtual world you have in Second Life and OpenSim, the students all have to use the same space, whereas that's an optional in Unity, which means for Unity we can have as many instances of the flats or bungalows or houses, what we're using. So they're not getting in each other's way, so it makes it a lot easier for the students to see everything they need to see, and they're not having to navigate around each other. Also, the simultaneous users in Second Life, partly because we were limited to 1 flat or 4 flats, we could only have 8 groups simultaneously. In Unity, because we've only got their own, everyone can use their own computer, and we can get, we've had 40 simultaneous users, and we could probably get more if we had a room big enough to get that amount of people in. And again, this is just a reiteration of the negative effects that OpenSim has over Unity. Last year, as well as asking them all the other questions, with the additional security we have with Unity, because the students log into Unity using their university passwords, this gives us the option of creating an online exam. So we asked them if they would like to use that. This split the class 50-50, and if we look in more depth at all the people who didn't respond to that question with a no response, their written responses are also 50-50. But we're not going to go ahead with the exams because the people who didn't want one put forward a much better argument in that they think people who play games a lot will have an advantage over them, and also that feeling the negative side effects would also disadvantage people in an exam, which is something that is pretty indisputable, really. So that's something we're not going to look forward or move forward in. Going back to the clinical research, this is being used in hospitals with practicing occupational therapists with stroke patients. The occupational therapists are using this to sort of educate stroke patients and their families as to some of the issues they're going to have when they go home. and they would like to use the interaction with the patients. So what we've done is we've developed a number of different interfaces for people with poor motor skills to actually operate the interaction. I was hoping to be able to demonstrate this and have a computer, but if anyone wants to see it working live, I've got it on my tablet, so you can come and have a look and speak to me later. But we've got the gestures interface, which is you just swipe it to move around when you click on something to zoom in. We've got a thumbsticks interface, and here we have the picture of the stick-on joysticks, which just stick onto the tablet, and then they give you a physical interaction with the tablet, so you get a bit of feedback. So it's a little bit more intuitive than actually pressing non-physical buttons on a screen. We have the joypad interface. Again, this can also work with the stick-on joysticks. That's an analog interface for people with slightly lower motor skills. And we have the large arrows interface. That's for people with very poor motor skills, so they can actually control the interface using very large movements and make it very simple. That's pretty much it. These are the references to the papers that have been published on this. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping time. We've got time then for questions. Who would like to start? So hopefully we have a roving mic again. Yeah, we do. Questions? Yes, one at the front. Thank you. Is there a microphone coming?
Thanks. I was interested in your attempt to use the software as an assessment. Do you think that's going to be something that you rule out completely, or can you see the situation changing so that this could be introduced as a means of assessment for the students in future?
For an exam?
Yeah.
It could be used. There's no practical reason why we can't. But we do need to address the issue of what's causing the negative physiological side effects. We have, in the newer versions, let's go back, we have added a map button so they can actually navigate around the house just by clicking on the map, opening the map, and jump to a particular location rather than having to walk there physically through the virtual world. So we're hoping that's going to reduce the negative effects. There's also the other issue about people with no gaming experience feeling disadvantaged. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get that through sort of on an ethics side of forcing people to use a game when they do feel disadvantaged in doing so.
Just follow, thanks. But if you're using this method of teaching, then the students are going to get much more exposure to it while they're actually learning about these scenarios.
Yeah, the teaching session, we do this over sort of 1 or 2 weeks. They use the interaction 4 times. We have a training exercise. One thing I didn't mention here is we have to see all the disability aids we have. We have an exercise where they go in and do the stroke scenario, where they have a scenario of a stroke patient. And after they've done that, they go back in and use the options to add disability aids, so they can then go around and choose which disability aids they want to add. That gives them a lot more idea of why they're doing the exercise. But we also have a mental health scenario where they are given a scenario of somebody with mental issues, and they go into the house and they see how well they've been looking after themselves, and in the house there's lots of evidence of them not being able to look after themselves very well. But having done all those, they still only spend about 4 hours on there, and they're not necessarily that competent to actually go ahead and use it as an assessment.
Any more questions? No? Okay, well, let's thank our speaker once more. Mention of ethics reminds me to say that I don't know if there are people here who've been having issues around gaining ethics approval for the kind of research we're all involved in, but just to say, I'd be interested to know if you have. I'm doing some ongoing work with Southampton and Oxford universities looking at the role of research ethics committees in deciding whether research involving particularly people with learning disabilities goes ahead and involves those people as users, because we found a lot of conflicts in a number of universities, particularly Russell Group universities, where if someone's deemed to be, in quotes, vulnerable, they're not permitted to be involved in the research, which is actually in conflict with the whole principle of user participation. So we've published one paper in that, we're working on a second one, so if people have experience and do see me outside the session, I'd be really interested to talk to you. Okay, we'll move on. We're actually a few minutes ahead of time, which is always a good thing, to our next speaker. And that's Stephen Battersby talking about applying mixed reality and Sphero robots to teach STEM concepts. And not having the... Right, okay. Oh, so we'll just... brief pause whilst obstacles are put in place. Yes, you may want to move forward for this session if you want to get a better view of the robot, if I presume that's what it is. And once Stephen has his radio mic on, we'll begin.
So bear with me 1 minute. Bear with me while I calibrate this thing.
Take your time, we're ahead of time.
This is very on the floor. It's a very slippy floor, this. Right, stay on. Hello everybody, my name is Stephen Battersby and I'm here to talk to you today about applying mixed reality and Sphero robots to teach STEM concepts. So, quick bit about the talk. Basically, I'm going to talk about affordable robotics for use in mainstream education, which I believe are robust and safe enough to facilitate this task, and one which can be a framework which can be extendable across for use of a variety of curriculum subjects and a variety of skill sets. And the skill sets is pretty much the most important part for this particular venue and conference. So, here we have a nice picture of Judge Judy, and for all those who are familiar with Judge Judy, one of the things that she's famous for saying is, that's hearsay. Now the reason I've got this here is one of the core reasons why I've gone about doing this research and where the inspiration has come from is from a lot of hearsay from teachers and people in meetings, things like that. So I always, I'm sat there in a meeting and I'll hear various pieces of information, some which I should repeat, some which I shouldn't. But you hear things such as, that's a really expensive robot, some teachers will be afraid to use that in schools, and then I'm out telling my friends and family about various robots and things that we use, and I hear the same thing. I hear, that's really expensive, what happens if somebody breaks that? And that sort of information. So that's where we have the that's hearsay, and also if I want to be a bit of an expert. So what we have with Sphero is Sphero have a really nice educational program out the box, and that's called the Spark program. It's a curriculum developed by the makers of Sphero to test STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and mathematics, based concepts to 8 to 13-year-olds. At the heart of Spark is the ethos that play is a powerful teacher. So what we do is we're aiming to expand this thinking further by allowing learning to take place in not just normal teaching environments, but fun mixed reality environments as well, which will hopefully add creative problem solving, teamwork and social interaction. Can we play the video?
When you're a kid, learning and playing always seem to be on opposite sides. but we believe we can change that. Meet Spiro Spark Edition, the playful robot that makes programming fun and offers challenges for every skill level. Spark began as a local meetup group where we taught kids how to code. A year later, we launched a series of free lessons, enabling students and teachers to discover all that's possible with the Spiro Ball. Now, as we face a future where coding will be as important as reading and writing, we want to give everyone the opportunity to learn the language of tomorrow. In the box, you'll find Spiro Spark Edition, an induction charger, and a few other handy tools to help you get creative. The ball itself comes packed with all the same sensors and electronics as Spiro 2.0, but unlike Spiro 2.0's white shell, we've encased Spark Edition in clear polycarbonate, bringing you closer to the robotic action. Get started by downloading the Spark app and connecting to your ball via Bluetooth. If you're new to coding, learn some basic principles by first exploring the sample programs. Then, set off to create your very own, using drag and drop commands like roll, spin, flip, and color change. At any time, you can even access the actual code behind the blocks and get a sense of how text-based programming operates. If you need a break from coding, turn your device sideways to just drive, or tap on the Community tab to see what others are creating. Spark Edition is also compatible with all of the other games and apps already available for Spiro. We have big plans for Spark Edition, so be sure to check for updates. It's time to break the rules about learning. So fire up your imagination and begin exploring robotics, programming, and so much more.
Right, so that was the official project video from Spiro Robotics, makers of Spiro robots. That gives you a brief overview of what their actual educational program is. So they have 17 different modules and interactions which you can download for free and you can apply to teach STEM. So what is a Spiro? Spiro is a robotic rule that can be controlled by Bluetooth enabled technologies, which means we can use it with a computer, we can use it with a tablet, we can use it with a mobile phone. It can be instructed to roll at a given speed and direction for a given amount of time, provides feedback in the form of variable colour illumination, and it's unique that it can perform as a controller as well as a robot. So, I don't know, can you hear? So what's actually going on there is the robot's moving inside the sphere itself, as I turn it. It's got accelerometers and a gyroscope and that in there, so we can actually use this as a controller, so we can steer around a 3D environment, things like that if we wanted to. Put that down there. Okay. The features of Spiro that make it perfect for teaching STEM is it allows direct mapping of core curriculum concepts such as compound measures through to more advanced topics like applied geometry and computer programming. So a nice example of that would be speed equals distance divided by time. And we can change those variables on the robot and people can see how modifying each one of those variables will work in real time. So if I've got speed, distance and time. So how we're going to expand upon this existing framework is by actually saying, that's really, really great, that's brilliant, but we want to be able to use additional sensors and inputs and all that as well. So the idea of the concept is to take the actual technologies afforded by a mobile phone and apply those to robotics as well. So not only can this be applied to Spiro, but this can also be applied to other robots such as the ones we have on the side of there, such as Lego Mindstorms, now Kendo, and other robots as well. So the result is we have a nice self-contained system with advanced methods for interaction and feedback that rival and sometimes surpass those of more expensive robots. So basically what that means is using the technology of a mobile phone, we can do things like shape recognition, text recognition, speech recognition. We can apply all of those to the robots as well. That's just the general ones which come in with quite a lot of pre-built robots. So this in turn allows for a more comprehensive level of curriculum coverage. And I've got down here e.g. social competence skills because going back to the hearsay statement, a while ago I was sat outside a hotel in Bulgaria speaking to a couple of people which are in this room for the SGSCC project. I don't know if you saw Andy's talk earlier. And one of the things that one of the people said, wouldn't it be good if we could actually use a robot to do social competencies and have a conversation with the robot? So taking that idea on, that piece of hearsay, one of the things which we actually implemented is the ability now to actually have a conversation with the robot using AI/ML, and then we can train that so we can then say, how are you today? The robot says, I'm great, thank you. And then if you turn around and say to the robot something like, yes, but you smell, that's socially incompetent, and the robot can respond accordingly. So we can actually use the robots to train up basic skills. So the enhancements, which I've already listed, are audio recognition, object recognition, symbol recognition, text and speech recognition, including the AI I just gave the example about, inertial sensor-based input and navigation, and the real-time display of performance metrics. So one of the great things about augmented reality is I can look at the ball, I can look at the targets, and I can actually have the metrics. So if I use the speed equals distance divided by time example, as I'm looking on the screen here, I'll be able to float those above the robot so we can actually see that in real time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Right, so how Sparks, the programming which you saw in the video, how it's done at the moment. I think this is very similar sort of block style to Pocket Code. Can somebody clarify? Yeah, so it's done in a similar way to Pocket Code and Scratch, that sort of thing. And that's a case of dragging and dropping different blocks. And again, as I said in the video, you can then see how this would be normal, proper sort of coding, which nerds like me are more used to. But that brings us to complexity questions. So for some groups, this is far too complex, even the drag and dropping of blocks and things like that. You know, what happens if you've got poor literacy skills or various other issues? How can we get around that sort of situation? So, going back to our technology enhancements, in order to combat that, we can do things like symbol recognition, we can do object recognition. So those of you who are familiar with Makaton as a symbol language, what I'm proposing is, instead of having like the command of rotate 90 degrees, then go forward 10 as individual blocks in the block diagram, what we can actually do is we can do that with symbols. So we can lay out an array of symbols and scan those symbols in. And the nice thing about symbols is we can also have, I don't know if you can see up there, we've got a football on the ball. We can have a nice little visual indication or animation to reinforce that as well. And another one being object recognition. This is a slide of an image from the actual library which we use to implement this, which is Vuforia. I don't know if people are familiar with that. If not, go and check it out. What you can actually do is you can scan real-world objects in that as well, and use those inside your virtual reality environment. So if I wanted to, I could have various objects like I put on the stage here. I can scan those objects and they can become artifacts inside the environment. So not only can I navigate around in the real world, I can actually crash into one, hit it, and I can have a 3D sort of explosion using the Unity engine. So typical educational lesson. In a typical lesson, this is what I envisage. Students will work in small groups to play out a gameplay scenario, and in order to complete each lesson, they are required, but not exclusively to, use the Sphere Array to input commands to manipulate the environment. Write computer programs that control how the Sphere Array rolls and appears. Input commands that control how the Sphere Array rolls and appears. So each learning game scenario takes place in a specially designed tabletop programming space area, which is the arena. That was true when I very first started looking at the system, but in fact, we've scrapped that. All you need now is an initial target definition, which you'll be able to find via Vuforia. And you can put that down in that corner, and then you can actually use the whole area and the whole space that you wanted. So really, the area could be a whole classroom floor or a whole surface like the surface here if you wanted. So the arena facilitates two primary roles. As I was saying just then, foremost it allows physical objects to be scanned and placed so that they can become parts of the mixed reality environment. This allows for real-world objects to become both physical and augmented features. Secondly, the arena provides visible metrics that the student can use to solve a task. What that was in the original version, which was actually on a tabletop, essentially I had that laid out on a grid. So going back to the speed equals distance divided by time example, you could then say how many units would it move on the grid if I applied such a speed and that sort of thing. I was hoping to do some demos, but unfortunately I haven't been able to do that with the logistics. So please do come find me after the talks and I'll give you a few examples and show you how things work in real time. And that's it from me.
So we're a very good group of speakers for time. We're finishing early every time, which leaves us more room for questions.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to see it working? First one is, somebody like to see it
Who was that?
working.
That was you. Would you like to drive?
Well, let's have a go.
Yeah. Right. So we need to do is let me just reconnect it.
You're on stage.
Yeah.
If you're on stage, people will be able to see.
I've got to reconnect anyway. So. Come on, Michael. Let's go. Alright. So I'll just calibrate it. Alright, so what you need to do is press a bit harder. There we go. If I let you hold it, that's it.
So there's an image of the ball robot on the mobile phone screen, and what's being touched on the screen is replicated.
Go up. Yeah, keep going.
And it's obviously robust as well.
Yes. I was wondering now, do I actually drive it off the stage to... It's done it for me.
So you keep driving while we see if we've got any more questions. Yes, there's a question there. Can you wait for the microphone?
If I understood right, so the children are also able to program this ball.
Yes. What we've done is created several Android plugins for Unity, and with those you can then drop those in and then do whatever programming task and that you want to do with Unity in a similar way you would with the old robots. So I have a plugin for the speech recognition. I have a plugin with the AI functionality in there as well. I rewrote the Sphero come with a Unity plugin already, but the trouble is that hasn't been updated in years and it doesn't have various things such as the collision detection and all that in there. So rewrote that plugin and that as well. And yep, no, it's still going. So basically, yes, you can. The overarching idea would be to replace the sort of pocket code equivalent drag and drop interaction and with, so go forward, stop, turn right 90 degrees, that sort of interaction there, or otherwise use the symbols as well. So I'm trying to extend the existing Spark educational system to use the additional interactions so people without the capability of using, the existing one can do so. That makes sense?
Yeah.
No,
I was just thinking about how complicated is coding. I don't know how to code, so I was thinking, what about children and how difficult it is for them, and probably it's very simple action. They can try to code in a very simple way.
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend you go and have a look at that existing curriculum and go and see the sort of things which are there and see how it can be complemented and expanded for people with different abilities.
More questions? Yes, just there.
Obviously the main presentation was about expanding the functionality of the Sphero robots.
Yeah.
But linking into the earlier question, with regards to the Spark application and the pocket code that it provides with the drag and drop.
Yep.
I'm not sure of the prevalence of pocket code, but do the company provide like APIs for other programmers to use to say implement something that's more prevalent in industry, say the same drag and drop interface, but it will convert it into, say, Java code or something that's more...
No, they have a different code. They have several... They have a really, really good expansive set of SDK, which will run on iOS, Android, as well as Windows. And it's not just the individual... So you've got Java in there, you've got the Java SDK. They also have their own custom robotic programming language, which is Oval. Pretty sure that's what it's called. So you have a full extensive set which you can apply to across the board to lots of different technologies.
Is the Spark application closed source?
Well, the fact that they've given away their whole SDK, I couldn't tell you about the actual Spark application. And again, that's not something which I envisage that we would be using anyway. That's something that's there and existing and done by somebody else. I'm more interested in the fact of being able to open up to a greater range of
the
users.
hardware.
Yeah, with a greater range of abilities. And in terms of open applications and source, I'm more than happy to give away all the different plugins and all the source code for these programs, as is.
So another question just behind you.
Another question would be, what's the minimum age that could use that drag and drop to be able to create a simple program? I noticed the interface was text-based.
They target, in their work, they target aged 8 to 13, but realistically, I think you could do that younger if you particularly wanted to.
So the interface is customizable as well?
That's
Like
their
developers.
interface.
Okay.
The stuff which I'm proposing that we develop further on top of that interface, I think we can open up to a younger age group.
Thank you.
And again, not limiting yourself to physical interactions such as drag and drop, we now have the capability for speech interaction, symbol interaction, object recognition, all that sort of stuff. Which I will show you if you come and find it.
Yes, another question here.
Thanks. Have you explored the different screen sizes, like tablets versus smartphones, for controlling the ball? Because
I've run...
The gut feeling is it might make a difference, maybe for like younger children as well.
I've run everything on a variety of tablets. I've run primarily on a Note 4 as for phones, but I've also got a Nexus over there which will also run the stuff as well. Perfectly happy. And I've run it on a desktop PC, but only through the webcam because it's a tablet and mobile application which I've developed through Fourier. Only support tablets and that at the moment, but I envisage no issue across.
It's good it works. Just wonder if you might see any differences.
No, because I mean, with the modern advances of Unity, you now have this nice, wonderful built-in GUI system which you can scale to individual tablet sizes and that. And that's what essentially I've been building and using, and I've catered for that. So.
Great, thanks.
Any more questions? Yes, at the back.
Hi. It's not a question, it's really a comment. I really like the fact that you're interested in widening access and you keep bringing it back to that. So when we start going off talking about click and drop, you bring us back.
Yes,
exactly what you're about, and I'm really, really enthused by that.
Thank you very much.
Because absolutely it's going to widen access from age 8 right the way through to anyone who might be operating at a different point at any stage of their life, rather than it being limited to the age, but also it's not going to be limited to whether we're using our bodies, our voices, sounds, non-verbal communication. So I really like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's also important to say there's a body of knowledge out there on the part of teachers, because some of us are old enough to have remembered floor robots first time round in the 1980s, when they were very similar looking devices, much more limited in what they could do, but you still programmed them, and people thought then they were going to be used by older children, but teachers quickly found that very young children could do really interesting things with them if the interface was right. So I think you're absolutely right.
If you want to, as I say, have a go, give me your email address, I'll send you the code, or I'll make the code available so you can run it and have a go. Download it.
That was using Logo, wasn't it?
One of them, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
The comment, because I'm looking at there's like an online net logo.
Yeah.
There's some ways you can do that. And I thought with that question about Java, so net logo exports to Java, so if you could have a logo interface for it, maybe that would be.
Yeah, so those who couldn't hear, we were talking about the fact that this relates back to the work schools do mostly with Logo, though not completely. But of course, where we are now is up and down the country. There are thousands of schools running code clubs of various descriptions that are the ideal resource to use to develop this kind of activity. Any last questions before I...
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, push.
So, following on from basically what you're saying, can anybody think of any other sort of interactions which they would like to see as an input for people with disabilities, learning disabilities, as well as physical?
Switch access.
Switch access. Done it. So you've got.
PCR.
All right. Any more? Near field communication. Yeah, that should be feasible and possible as well. It's a good idea.
Maybe
So you said that. Eye goes as well. Right, brilliant. That's the next door.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we thank our speakers? Okay, there will be a slight pause now whilst we change gear and I hand over to Penny, who will be chairing the next session. Although we're a bit early, so we might wait because people may be swapping between rooms. You didn't need it there, both were
That's a great little device.
Yeah, No. I work for
He puts them all out.
Yeah, that's the key thing. Is the fact that it's very much. You don't mind so that's the key. Have a colour. I mean, as I say, I'm happy to give out rather than. You don't need to. Ollie. I've not used the Ollie yet. All the stuff on the side.
So ambitious, but it couldn't deliver what they kept saying it was going to do, and it got fed up. So it got to the next thing.
Right, this one.
It's you.
Yeah.
I'd like to see your because that.
See that slide there for work? 2 wheels. Gyroscope inside.
Yeah, they're so cool. Yeah, but that's
So you were okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that. But I'm not a full presenter myself.
Hey? Yeah, I was wondering whether I should do that.
You're not running away with it.
There it is. No problem. Thank you very much.
Let's get back.
Okay, can you resume your seats, please, because we're starting the next session. Okay, this session's about using virtual environments for health. And we've got 5 presentations, so you've got another 2 now before you can have a short break with tea and biscuits. And then we'll go on to the next 3 after the break. So let me just first of all introduce the first speaker, and this is Mike Craven, together with his colleague Maddie Groom, are going to talk about computer games for user engagement in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I've got a label mic on. Is that clear enough for everybody in the back? Great, okay. So, thanks for the introduction. And so I'm going to be talking about computer games for ADHD. I think obviously it's great. We had the keynote this morning. I will still give a definition of ADHD. And we're interested in sort of 2 main areas for games. That's monitoring and therapy. And so I'm with an organisation based in Nottingham on the University of Nottingham Innovation Park called MindTech. And we're funded by the National Institute for Health Research, which is basically it's the research arm of the NHS. and based in the Institute of Mental Health, and both myself and Maddie are there. Maddie's in the medical school. Actually, my background is originally in computer science and engineering, but I've moved very much more into the sort of health technology assessment area. So a lot of what we do in MindTech is look at the technologies that are out there and look at how they could be evaluated for clinical use, but also we do a little bit of development ourselves, and this paper is a little bit about both of those things. Okay, just thought that's worth having that introduction. Okay, so I'll introduce ADHD and the core traits, potential for games in ADHD, a review of the literature that we did on games for ADHD, and there are quite a few, and then some of the game designs for impulse control in ADHD based on various psychology-based tests, and I'll go into those later. And some of the work we've done previously and reported on previously, and then a couple of new games, and one of them which we've just recently implemented and tried out with young people, children. Okay, so ADHD, it's a relatively common neurodevelopmental condition, and it affects 3 to 5% of the general population. And also, it's less known that the majority of children with ADHD also go on to experience symptoms in adulthood. So there is this issue of diagnosing adults with ADHD, and that's quite many people haven't been formally diagnosed, especially once they've reached adulthood. There are frequent comorbidities and also sorts of societal issues that are related to ADHD. And then finally, from an individual point of view, diagnosis can have a really significant positive benefit. And there are, and the NHS in Notts Healthcare locally has an adult ADHD clinic, which my other colleague Linda Gillett will be talking about tomorrow, actually in the community forum, in case you're interested. Okay, so 3 core characteristics: inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Very basically, inattention, difficulty to concentrate when you're easily distracted. Hyperactivity, you're fidgety, unable to keep still. I'm trying to keep still here. Talking excessively, always on the go. And then impulsivity is acting quickly without thinking, so maybe, and particularly to do with games, you press a button more quickly than somebody perhaps in the general population, interrupting, difficulty waiting turns. So there are 3 main characteristics. And just to note that these traits are present in the general population. If we did an impulsivity test on all of us here, some of us would be more or less impulsive, and it's really the ADHD is sort of at the extreme end of those traits. And some people diagnosed with ADHD will have more or less of these, not necessarily all of these that are particularly severe. Okay, so the potential for games in ADHD. Well, first of all, I think they can be used to increase understanding, so from a research point of view. And so we can support research into better understanding the 3 core traits that I just talked about. Then monitoring or self-monitoring. So this is using games so that people can support themselves perhaps at a diagnosis, in everyday life. And that could be either done remotely, maybe using a mobile platform, and that could to speak to the clinic, or potentially use the technology for self-monitoring just with yourself at home or in the general environment. And that can be so to complement complement diagnostics and other treatments, and I'll explain what they are in a minute. And then finally, to use games for therapy. So actually playing games may help to improve some of the traits of symptoms of ADHD, and hopefully to improve educational ability. So at the moment, what do we do at the moment? Well, what the clinic does at the moment, very much the diagnosis of ADHD is based on a clinical judgment. And existing treatments are mainly drug-based and take medication, and there are some examples of using CBT or cognitive behavioural therapy, and perhaps in combination with medication to treat ADHD. So for games, the potential for games is really they're not in common usage, but there are there's a considerable research interest in the idea of using games, and perhaps maybe you might not call them games, but sort of psychological tests that you might do, or tasks that you might do to aim to improve the symptoms. Okay, so we've done a little bit of the work ourselves, and I will be explaining that later, and I talked a little bit about some of that last year. But we decided, we've done some of our own work. We haven't at that point we hadn't really done a sort of full literature review of what's out there in terms of games, the use of games in ADHD in its broadest sense. And when we did that, we found there were three main foci: the more sort of human performance focus, so cognitive tasks, a bit sort of psychological tests, people doing those, not particularly with any purpose, but to really look at how playing games might affect symptoms of ADHD. The educational focus, so the main emphasis there being to try and improve a sort of training or reading ability, for example. And then a sort of more medical clinical focus, which is more of what we do, or at least our colleagues do in psychiatry, is to look at how ADHD games could be used to monitor or provide therapy, as I mentioned. And so we look at those three foci, then we come up with we find a variety of games. Some of them are about improving health awareness or educating. Some of them are about performance. Some of them are about clinical or educational outcomes. And this is not to go through this list, because this is really to summarise what we've done in the paper. And this is not a systematic review, so not all the papers are here. In fact, even some of the ones we found we didn't put in the paper just to keep it as quite a short paper. But these are sort of the main areas that we found based on what I just said on those three foci. So the task focus, we're very much concerned with the abilities of games players, and some of those were directed at action video games mostly, and then also to a lesser extent puzzle games. And then in the education or sort of health awareness focus, it's a little bit less well defined, but we found one paper on using virtual reality and comparing that with a sort of real world environment. Some work on intelligences. In fact, I've got some more slides on this, so I'll go on to that more quickly. Intelligences, health awareness, some work mainly looking at third parties and increasing their awareness of ADHD. Then some work specifically looking at working memory. And then the medical clinical focus, we've got all these different areas. So we've got cognitive behavioural therapy that I've already mentioned, but also specific psychological tests. They're called CPTs, continuous performance tests, stop signal and go no-go tasks, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Working memory again, eye gaze, based games, and then neurofeedback or brain-computer interface, similar to what we've seen over here, using either EEG, theta-beta ratios, or slow cortical potentials. And then there's one paper reviewing other biofeedback in games for ADHD, looking at other physiological signals. Okay, so looking at the task focus then, I'm not going to, and I can see I probably won't have time to go into these in great detail, but the main sort of what we found in the literature then, that the task focus is looking at the abilities of games players in playing action video games or puzzle games, and they included an element of difficulty that was increased throughout the test, or if you want to call it a game, and then most studies were involving tests of visual processing and memory. And here are some of the names of the types of games that you'll find in the literature. So we've got flanker compatibility, so you're looking at shapes while trying to ignore distractions in the periphery, so obviously that's going to be useful for impulse control in ADHD, and measuring processing speed as the task gets more difficult. Enumeration, you're counting things, for instance counting squares, how accurately you're doing the counting, and as the number of squares is increased. We've got localization, it's just spotting objects in the visual space on the screen, and again looking at how that gets, how your performance changes as it becomes more difficult. And you've got the blink test. detecting a specified letter stimulus after another task relevant stimulus. And then there's a bunch of others which I've just named, but you can look at the literature, random task switching, response inhibition, various memory tests, which you can see at the bottom. Okay. But the overall sort of picture that we get from looking at this literature then is that these studies have tended to show enhanced cognitive function in habitual gamers. That's the first point. And then secondly, that non-gamers that are exposed to video gaming sessions can improve their performance. And it's a couple of papers which I've cited there. One of them's looking at the action video games, the other one's looking at puzzle games. And then the implications for ADHD then, well, I think we can see there's a potential for therapeutic benefit because those tasks are related to executive functions which include attention and impulsivity, but they've not really been looked at explicitly for ADHD for the most part. And there's just also there's an issue in terms of perhaps what we heard about this morning about the video portrayal of video games players. We might expect that there could be some issues around feasibility and acceptability when are you allowed to play games at school, well, during a class or between classes. Who knows exactly how that's going to work? And also there's the acceptability of the young people themselves, or indeed the adults if it's for adult ADHD. Okay, so the educational focus then. So I mentioned the cyber therapy classroom, and that was actually looking at some continuous performance tests, particularly within a virtual environment, comparing it to doing those in the classroom on a normal desktop PC, and they'd find some improvement in the sort of more focused VR environment. But another paper looking at intelligences, and that was I put this here, it could have gone in the first section, but because the motivation for the paper was about training, we've put it here. Health awareness. There's one game we found that was actually to try and help people learn more about what it's like to be continually distracted, and you play the game, and that's quite interesting. And so you get the idea that you could empathise with somebody who has ADHD. And also our own work that I presented last year, which was about taking that into the public realm, and we developed the game Attention Grabber, where you played the game on a large screen, in fact in the wild. Again, but directed at third parties. 5 minutes, goodness me, I better move on. Okay, so these are the examples, and these are more pictorial. We've got gaze-based therapy, so this is using eye tracking. And there's a couple of examples. Here's a clown going along a tightrope, and there's some work from our colleagues looking at other games where you have to avoid distractions whilst trying to play the game. So that's quite interesting, both based on eye tracking. Not so much work has been done on evaluation, or that's just starting with our colleagues. We've also got some examples then of brain-computer interfaces. So we're requiring the user to concentrate. So we've got the game Pogo Land, where you're actually steering a bird looking for fruit, and the idea is you relax your brain, and the birds will you can move it in the right, and you can increase its speed by concentrating, and also jump at certain points. And then this other game, Play Attention, where you're controlling the height of a diver or a dolphin. And again, there's some quite good results from controlled studies with both of those, which you can look at. And then the other sort of brain-computer interface work is around slow cortical potentials, and there's two good examples of those. And the nice one I quite particularly like, this is very famous in Germany, this mouse, and there's lots of videos of it doing various things on YouTube. In this case, it's using it's pole vaulting, and you have to control it by relaxing your brain, and you can see that in use there. So some quite interesting results there. This is our previous work on snappy apps. The idea is that's a continuous performance test where you have to spot X after A. We gamify it a little bit with bananas and cherries, and that's something that we've done also on the big screen in Attention Grabber. So, and we got some quite good results from those, but with small numbers of participants. And so I won't go into that now, but we've published some work on it that's cited, and we've done that with young people and adults. And so now on to really what we're doing with this paper is we've designed a couple of new games based on psychological tests called Go, No Go and Stop Signal tasks. And the one I'm talking about mainly is a game called Awkward Owls, which is based on a go, no go test. And the idea is that you're supposed to spot yellow owls and ignore brown by clicking on the smartphone screen. And you get some feedback if you click the right one. But the game captures your performance on the game, but also captures your demotion. So we're able to capture the activity or the hyperactivity of the player while they're playing. So we can capture all three of the traits of ADHD in the same game. So we've actually tested that one out. And the one on the right is a concept in the paper, and I won't have time to talk about this now, called Wormy Fruit, but that's a stop signal task, and that's the idea is that you're going to stop before the worm comes out of the apple. So that's you can look at the details of the design, but we haven't implemented that one. So for Awkward Owls then, we ran this at Summer Scientist Week, which is a great event that the psychology department at the University of Nottingham run every year. And Maddie here has been involved with it for many years, and this was my first time to get involved in it. And we designed Awkward Owls, and this is the poster to encourage the parents to play this game. The children sign up in advance, and they can do any of the tests and the games that are there. But this is just to tell them a little bit about it. And you can see there's all sorts of fun stuff going on as well as the games. But people have signed up, and there's full ethical approval for this. The children go in and they participate in a number of tests that are related to cognitive psychology. So that just happened in August. So we ran the test, and I can't present the results today because we haven't analysed them yet, and it's a BMed Psych student project. But basically, every child that took part, and 120 did so on the day, which is a great sample for any scientist. And they practiced with 20 owls for 15 seconds to get the idea of the game, and then they had 100 owls. They were seeing actually more yellow than brown, but they were asked to ignore the brown by not pressing. We collected all the game data and processed some of it actually on the phone to make it easier to analyse. We captured reaction time, device motion, as I've mentioned. And every child that played, we also did a pre-questionnaire and asked them, do you play games? What kind of games do you play? That kind of thing in your household. And then we had a user experience questionnaire for our app. So we've got quite a lot of data about the user experience of using it, which is generally positive, we think. And then each child within the Summer Scientist Week also completed a strengths and weaknesses of ADHD SWAN questionnaire, which is one of the questionnaires that's used for young people with ADHD. So we've actually got a sort of baseline to help us analyse the results. This is general population, so again, some of those children may or may not have ADHD, but they will have completed a SWAN questionnaire. So we're not going to diagnose anybody, but we're going to, but we will have some data about where they are in terms of ADHD. So the main conclusions are, we've found those three main foci in the literature. We've developed some new games, and we do think they've got potential for training of inhibitory control. We've implemented one game, and the future work, and this is the last slide, we're going to analyse the data, or at least Kashara, the student's going to do that, and we'll hopefully get some results which we can present later. We need to look at level design. How do we increase the difficulty? We know that to get engagement, continue with engagement, we'll need to do that. So to get continued engagement, we'll need to think about level design. What we realise with doing the review is that there is this sort of thing as ontologies for games, and so if you try and categorise how games are designed, and for instance, what kind of input devices are used, etc., what features of the game exist. We realised that nobody's really done it for what cognitive or executive functions are within games, so we're going to do that next. But this is at least one step towards that. And then we want to look at the question of authenticity of cartoon characters. I mentioned that mouse, incredibly famous in Germany, but our owls, they're just graphics we took off the internet. So in fact, we wanted to use minions, but we thought we didn't want to get into a trademark problem with Universal Studios. So we went for owls instead. But would it have been different with minions? Who knows? Would we have got more engagement? And then finally, yeah, the value of adding more games mechanics, something to explore. And then, yeah, so this wasn't a systematic review, but at some point we'll do that. And if your literature wasn't cited, it doesn't mean we didn't perhaps even know about it. But if, obviously I've already learnt more about what's out there today, which has been brilliant. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, yeah, your chance to ask Mike some questions.
That was really interesting, thank you. Just a question, I have a 7-year-old who was diagnosed in the last month with ADHD, and I'd have a lot of experience with adult ADHD. But on the last one with the owls on the mobile device, is it the fact that it's a mobile device and you're getting the motion sensing data when they're not actually pressing a button either way, or not pressing it? The important data here, because so you're gathering the raw RT and the device motion and the game data. So I'm probably misreading it, but is that raw data, unrelated to whether they press the button or not, equally more important or just interesting as opposed to did they press the right button or not? Because I'm thinking of the 7-year-old at home who would have already gone to play Netflix in the middle of the game, or Angry Birds instead of Angry Owls, So
well, that's actually a great question, and there are two answers to that. One of them is that there is a desktop, sort of more clinically focused test which measures device motion. So it measures motion. In fact, you wear an infrared head tracker with to capture that motion, and it is useful. It's clinically useful. We know there's huge numbers of problems with doing it on a mobile device. We don't know what the person's actually really doing when we capture it. They might be walking down the street, they might have their elbow on the table. There's also, they might have left the phone on the table and just be playing it on the... So we don't know, there's a lot we don't know. And so there's huge, so really it's just, even asking somebody to do it, please hold the phone like this during the test, is only the first step to trying to understand how we use the device motion. At the moment, probably the test results of the continuous performance test in Snappy App, or in this case of the no-go task, is probably more useful. What do you think, Maddie? But exploring the use of the motion is very...
Thanks for that. I'm going to hand the microphone back.
Can I just ask? Thanks. Yeah, so just wanted to add to that. It's a really interesting question, and in fact one of the things that we're struggling with is how to make a game exciting enough that children with ADHD will want to play it, but as soon as a game gets exciting, that obliterates their cognitive problems with attention and things like that. So one thing we're looking at the moment is is the motion enough? Is that predictive enough of treatment response in ADHD or symptom severity, and could we then just have a more passive wearable device, like you can get these wristbands and so on that monitor motion? Could we just use that? Would that be enough without having to see whether we can get a child to play a game that, even with our best efforts, might still be boring to them? So yeah, it's about trying to understand what are the features that we need to measure, really.
It's only 75 seconds though, so I think they played in 75 seconds.
Well, it was quite mixed. The children who performed it were aged 6 to 11 years, 120 of them, and it was quite mixed as to whether they thought it was okay or not. The student that ran the study said some of them were just so fed up by the end, and it was only a few minutes. So we've really got to make a decision now as to whether we keep trying to find an exciting game or just accept that that's too difficult and look at motion detection instead.
We will capture that from the user experience questionnaire as well. In fact, it goes from boredom to, it was fantastic. So we will get some of that data as well, which will be really interesting. Any more questions?